Call to order. Welcome to the August 24th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. We have 6 discussion items on our agenda today and 2 items under committee report. With a full agenda, I would ask for a focus with each discussion to allow us to get through the entire agenda. As we transition back to in-person meetings, again, I will ask commissioners to hold all questions until the conclusion of all presentations and any public comments. And finally, please be recognized by the chairperson before speaking because she can't tell that you want to talk when you have a mask on. We have one small housekeeping item this morning. Without objection, we are going to pair items CP 921, currently listed under old business, with item Z 2021. These items will both be addressed under new business. Moving on to public comment, we start every meeting with an opportunity for the public to comment on an item not listed on the agenda. Are there any members of the public who wish to provide comment this morning? Please come up, sir.
Excuse me, but you said not listed on the agenda, so if it's on the agenda, wait until that's called?
Correct. Thank you. Any other members of the public wanting to submit public comment on any item not on the agenda? No? All right, we will move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is a list of requests that can be acted upon in one motion. There are 2 items on the consent agenda this morning. Staff has completed review and has delivered the items to the Planning Commission to be deferred to a future meeting. All of these items will return on a future agenda to be discussed fully. With that, I offer a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Mann. Vice Chair Mann offers a second to my motion. By a show of hands, all in favor of the motion for approval of the consent agenda? Any opposed? Nope, the motion passes unanimously. Moving on to committee report. The Text Change Committee met on August 17 and has the following report on 2 items. Item D. As a result of a multi-year process, staff has provided an update to the city tree manual to replace outdated information, make the manual more user-friendly, correct errors, and provide clarity. The committee voted 4-0 for approval as written. Commissioner Miller, Chair of the Text Change Committee, do you have anything to add?
Nothing to add.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners on the tree manual update? Commissioner O'Haver?
So I had to leave early. I'm just wondering, did we get some flexibility in on the different types of materials that are allowed?
One of the questions that a member of the public had was with respect to the structural soils that are provided under in the tree manual, and we talked about the other alternatives just to the alternative types of structural soil, and staff told us that those other types of materials fall under the definition of structural soil.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other question or comment, I'd like to entertain a motion. Please remember to be recognized before you make a motion. Commissioner Miller?
I move to approve TC 521, the city tree manual update. And is there a consistency statement in the agenda?
There is.
And to adopt the consistency statement dated August 24th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials.
Okay, Commissioner Miller has offered a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Haver. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Nope, seeing none. By a show of hands, those in favor of Commissioner Miller's motion to approve? Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item D.2, TC 17A20 Transit Overlay District. This text change proposes amending the existing Transit Overlay District regulations. Changes to the TOD include modifications to parking requirements, the addition of density bonuses for affordable housing and employment uses, and changes to treatment of residential zoning districts. The TOD will also require development to meet urban limited frontage standards and apply the Main Street or mixed-use streetscape types. Additionally, outdoor amenity area requirements for urban plazas will apply in the TOD. The draft ordinance has been revised in response to comments received from the Text Change Committee at its June 15 and August 3rd meetings. I believe staff has a brief update to the draft ordinance to address the committee's discussion on August 17.
That's correct. This is John Anagnos from Planning and Development, and there are some updates to the text in the draft since your meeting last week, and so I can briefly show you those to prepare you if you would like to make a recommendation. So basically the two topics that came out during the meeting for changes to the ordinance were the area median income percentage that would be required for the affordable units to receive the density bonus related to affordable housing. So that was increased from 50% to 60% in response to comments from the committee. Additionally, there was a question about how that would be enforced in terms of over time after these units are provided, how is it ensured that they remain affordable? So some additional language about reporting requirements has been added. We did consider making those more specific in detailing what would be included in those reporting requirements. After speaking with the Housing and Neighborhoods Department and the City Attorney's Office, we felt more comfortable leaving that up to Housing and Neighborhoods to determine what the contents of that report would be, so that it wouldn't be caught up in any very particular language in the ordinance. And then finally, from the committee comments, there was an additional piece of language added to the provisions for applications, privately initiated applications, to apply the Transit Overlay District, basically stating that those applications would only be allowed in particular areas, basically contiguous to an existing TOD or close to a BRT route.
Thank you for the update. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners on the update to the ordinance language? Okay. Do we have any other questions or comments related to the Transit Overlay District language? No? Okay, we're good. Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. Just clarifying that we do not have any questions related to the Transit Overlay District and its relationship to other developments. We will actually see this Transit Overlay District being applied in a case further on the agenda, but this draft ordinance language would not apply to that at this time. That was the clarification we were discussing. Okay. With no other question or comment, I would like to entertain a motion.
Sorry, I have one additional comment.
Okay.
I'm trying to make sure that it's not already in this new draft consistency statement. I wanted to include, we talked in committee about adding a recommendation to council that they consider some other outstanding issues potentially for study. One of those is whether to require that properties that take advantage of the housing bonus are required to accept vouchers, number one. Number two, to study the option for providing a fee in lieu for the for the height bonus. And I believe, and whether to provide a tiered approach to the affordable housing thresholds required for the height bonus.
Okay. Procedurally, I believe we can make a motion to approve as written, and with that motion, make it two-part to recommend items for further study.
Great.
Okay. With that, would you like to proceed with the motion?
Yes. I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated August 24th, 2021, and to recommend approval of the text change TC 17A20, and also to adopt the those three recommended options for further study to council.
Okay, Commissioner Miller has offered a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Vice Chair Mann. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, I will take a vote on Commissioner Miller and Vice Chair Mann's motion. By a show of hands, those in favor of approving TC 17A20? Those opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to old business, we're going to move to the second item on the agenda, which is Z1821 Boylan Avenue. This is a request to rezone just under a half an acre from office mixed-use 3 stories detached with North Boylan Neighborhood Conserve Overlay District to office mixed-use 7 stories urban limited conditional use with transit overlay district. Originally, this item was discussed and deferred at the June 22nd Planning Commission meeting to allow the applicant to have additional conversations with the neighbors. Then this item was discussed at our August 10th meeting and deferred to allow the applicant time to revise conditions. I'd like to ask for a brief update from staff focusing on the changes to the application since our last discussion.
Yep. Thank you, Chair Fox and members of the Planning Commission. I will go right to the changes. So since your last meeting, an additional zoning condition has been offered for this case. It's condition number 5, which limits building height to 95 feet. At a 7-story district, which is requested, there's not otherwise a limit to height in feet. And so they have added this condition to provide more certainty of how tall the building will be once constructed. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. We've already heard from the applicant and members of the public and received a number of emails from neighbors in the vicinity. By a show of hands, how many members in the audience are here to comment on this item? Okay, there are none available. I'm going to pull it back to the table. Are there any questions and comments from commissioners for either staff or the applicant? Yep. I'll start it off with one question. From a code perspective, can you provide some information about the relationship of adding the TOD overlay to this parcel and the conditions as they're proposed?
Yep. So I think the biggest impact that the application of the TOD will have on development of the site is the regulation of the parking requirement. So there's no parking requirement for any use in the TOD. And the OX district will otherwise have requirements for parking. The TOD also requires a maximum of 2 spaces per residential unit, so there's a limit there as well. The likelihood that the property will be developed with some amount of parking, I think will still happen, but they're not required to have any minimum amount of spaces. So there's some possibility that there'll be less parking, which would encourage people to walk and ride the bike or use transit instead of driving their cars to and from the structure. So I think that's the biggest benefit of the TOD here.
Excellent, thank you, Mr. Clem. If there are any other questions or comments from Commissioner, I'll open it up. Commissioner O'Haver?
So just to clarify, the text change that we just recommended for approval would not allow the TOD overlay on this rezoning, correct?
Correct. Correct. And as we discussed at the text change committee, I believe the reason why was to get the benefit of a district, you need larger than 1 parcel application. This one came in prior to that text change moving forward, so that would be allowed. As we've heard, it's kind of a belt and suspenders approach to this particular case. Some of the conditions provided by the applicant, such as limiting the height, would not allow that applicant to take advantage of any height increase afforded to them with the overlay. So it's an unusual case. It's not wrong. I believe it's just it will be a challenge to weed through during the approval process of a development plan.
Yeah, I just think the main thing to focus on here is that they're not required to provide any parking, which is an appropriate regulation for this part of our city in the downtown. on the walkable street grid within a 10-minute bike ride to Union Station. So by allowing a development to occur with little or no parking, just encourages walkability.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in favor. I'm just curious if we're setting precedent for upcoming cases.
Nope, I believe once the ordinance goes into effect for the new TOD overlay, the rules that are outlined in that ordinance would apply.
Okay.
Okay. Is there any additional question or comment? No? Okay.
I have
Commissioner
one
Miller?
additional comment. I just wanted to say, I know that I was sort of concerned in weighing this case at the last meeting based on the fact that because of this neighborhood conservation overlay district that has perhaps outlived its original intent and therefore usefulness, there's been some inconsistency in the development pattern. With some of these changes, there will have been recent inconsistency in the development pattern in this area, and that is obviously a challenge for us to figure out what to do with. If this were next to a building with a residential use, I'd probably be more concerned. So if this were one block to the north, my vote on this might be different. But today, given all of the factors in this case, I support this change moving forward, or this rezoning case.
If there are no other comments, I'd like to.
I just have a question.
Go ahead.
Is there an expectation as to the reasonable lifetime of these? I think you had a good point. Maybe it has outlived its useful life or its original intent. Is there an expectation that we're giving to citizens as to how long we will adhere or kind of use that as a guide?
Pardon me, my phone was ringing on my laptop. No, there's not. There's nothing embedded in the code or anywhere else that indicates that these things will sunset. And there's no particular, the only provision in the code is actually, if you want to change the standards, you have to notify everyone in the NCOD. Even if you're only changing the standards for a subset. We saw that for a application not that long ago to modify the standards for parts of the NCOD on Edenton Street. But right now, there's never been a requirement to re-examine the application of NCOD or any particular process by which it might be considered in either code or plan.
Okay, so we're not necessarily negating that, we're just making an exception.
Well, I mean, once it's mapped, it's a zoning district. Zoning districts change. Obviously, it's built into the framework of zoning that a future governing body, with advice from the Planning Commission, might decide to change the boundaries. An application to change the boundaries is simply a rezoning application like any other under the code.
Thank you.
Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? No? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Miller?
I move to approve, to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated June 5th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of zoning case Z1821. Could I also add a statement to council in the recommendation that this case highlights some of the challenges with NCODs that have outlived their original intent?
Thank you. And I will offer a second to Commissioner Miller's motion.
Second.
Do we have any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? No. With that, I will ask for a show of hands. Those in favor of approving Z1821? All opposed? No. The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to new business. There are 4 items listed under new business portion of the agenda and 1 item that we moved from old business. Generally, these requests have not appeared on a previous Planning Commission agenda, and we will hear a full staff presentation and applicant presentation. The first item is Comprehensive Plan Amendment CP 921 and the associated rezoning case. If staff or the applicant would like to address CP 921, I invite you to do so now.
I'm going to defer to the applicant. I believe they had some information for the Planning Commission about CP 921.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Jamie Schwadler with Parker Poe, 301 Fayetteville Street, here on behalf of the applicant. As we explained in our the prior meeting, the timeline to relocate folks from Dick's campus by the deadline of 2025 meant that we needed to pursue zoning and site plan or ASR review this year. And the ASR review requires consistency with the comprehensive plan, including the street plan. Because of our timeline, we filed the comprehensive plan out of abundance of caution while we worked with staff to determine consistency. The staff has now confirmed that the ASR is consistent with the comprehensive plan for purposes of approving that phase 1 ASR. And based on that confirmation, we're withdrawing the comprehensive plan amendment. And I'll just address the zoning itself.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the applicant? It appears they have withdrawn this case, CP 921. No? Then I will recommend that we move on to item F.1, which is case number Z2021. This is a request to rezone approximately 34.15 acres from office mixed use 3 stories and office mixed use 5 stories urban limited to commercial mixed use 12 stories. I will start with a staff presentation from Mr. Anagnost.
Thank you, Chair Fox. Good morning again. This is zoning case Z-20-21 at the southwest corner of Reedy Creek Road and Blue Ridge Road, and is a request to rezone to commercial mixed use with a height of 12 stories. No conditions are offered. The existing zoning in this area is a mix of office mixed use and commercial mixed use. There is some agriculture productive to the northwest related to some state-owned open land. Here you can see the surrounding area. So the interchange of Wade Avenue and I-40 is to the south, and Rex Hospital's to the north. The North Carolina Museum of Art is on the east side of Blue Ridge Road, directly opposite this site. And the existing uses on the site are largely vehicle storage. There's a mail house there and a State Highway Patrol storage facility. Here you can see a little bit closer view. One thing to note in this image is you can see in the center of the site there's a wooded area that surrounds a stream corridor. That's an open air stream. Here are some views from the street level. So you can see Blue Ridge Road at District Drive in the top left image, and then District Drive on the top right. Farther to the west. The bottom left image is across from the entrance of the North Carolina Museum of Art at Reedy Creek. And then the bottom right image you can see directly into the site along Reedy Creek Road. And this is looking into the site from Blue Ridge Road. There are no conditions offered. It's a general use case. So the increase in height that would be the result of approval of this rezoning would, of course, increase the amount of development potential for the site. You can see here it's a little bit more than doubling. This area does not have a very high walk score relative to the city of Raleigh in general. You can probably understand that from seeing the photos of the context. Roadways here are large, sidewalks are inconsistent. There is a greenway trail that passes this site on its north side, and then it continues into the North Carolina Museum of Art property and continues east towards Meredith College. There is transit service here. As you can see, the Route 27 passes on Blue Ridge Road, and then there's also a regional bus service to Chapel Hill. This request would increase the potential for housing supply, though the intended use is for state offices for the Department of Health and Human Services. The future land use map here is split between office and residential mixed use and community mixed use, and so the commercial mixed use requested zoning is not consistent with the office and residential mixed use designation on the future land use map due to the additional uses that would be allowed in that zoning district, as well as the maximum height. And so the request is consistent with the red portion of the map you can see there, but inconsistent with that light blue or teal color on the map. And because the majority of the site area falls under that office and residential mixed use, overall it is inconsistent with the future land use map. This area has multiple designations on the urban form map. So Blue Ridge Road itself is a transit emphasis corridor. Reedy Creek and District Drive are both urban thoroughfares. And then this area sits within a large city growth center related to Blue Ridge Road. So all of those designations would recommend that a frontage be applied as part of the zoning request. A frontage would require that parking, in many cases, be located behind the building, or the amount of parking in front of a building be reduced, and that the building be placed close to the street. And the goal of those provisions is to support a more walkable and active streetscape, which is part of the recommendations of the Blue Ridge District study to see this area transition a little bit more to an integration of active uses so that it can be more urbanized as opposed to the more institutional uses that you see today. So due to the inconsistency with the future land use map and the urban form map, and the urban form map being inconsistent because of the lack of a frontage applied on the case or any conditions to simulate a frontage, the request is inconsistent overall with the comprehensive plan. There are some consistent policies. These are related to the desire to revitalize Blue Ridge Road or to transition it away from the institutional character of today, and also for the city to be a good partner with state agencies in fostering that type of development. There are also inconsistent policies related largely to the lack of frontage and the way that that would interact with the existing greenway trail that passes the site. The application of a frontage would probably lead to greater amenitization of that trail by placing active uses directly adjacent to it and providing a high-quality streetscape to connect to it and extend further south on Blue Ridge Road. Without the frontage requirements, that level of urban design can be lower in future development. There are also some inconsistent policies related to the traffic impacts that have been identified in the traffic impact analysis for this case. So the additional density here would be significant, and the nearby street network is not very well connected, though there will be some new street connectivity through the site with the administrative site review that's pending currently. One other thing to note about the traffic analysis is that the proposed mitigations proposed by the applicant as a way of addressing additional traffic congestion are likely to interfere with planned bicycle and pedestrian projects that are on the verge of construction by the city. So Blue Ridge Road has a pedestrian facility project that the planning is essentially complete and would lead to improved sidewalks and greenway connection there. The mitigations proposed as part of this traffic impact analysis may make some of those more difficult or function poorly. So your deadline for a recommendation is September the 20th, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Anagnost. Next, we will hear from the applicant and those in support of the project. You have 10 minutes.
Good morning again. Jamie Schwadler with Parker Poe at 301 Fayetteville Street on behalf of the applicant. I'm joined today by Will Johnson from the State Department of Administration, Chris Roberts of LS3P, Brian Purdy of McAdams, and also with us here today are Catherine Freeman White from the North Carolina Museum of Art and Jeff Murrison from the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance. I'd like to reserve at least 2 minutes at the end of the comments for them to address their support of the case. We spent a great deal of time talking about this a couple weeks ago, and so I'll try not to belabor the points, but some of the history, of course, informs what we're doing here today. So I'll briefly go over some of that summary. This case was filed in conjunction with the administrative site plan to achieve the goal of relocating the majority of the DHHS employees from the Dorothea Dix campus. The history of this case is important because it leads us to the request, the form that we're asking today, as well as the timing that we're under. In 2015, when the state conveyed the Dix property to the city, it triggered a lease expiration in 2025 and 2040 for DHH personnel. That triggered the state to find the location that we're considering today, which will house not only those DHHS personnel, but all of the other DHHS personnel from around the triangle and consolidated into one headquarters campus. In order to achieve that timeline, we're requesting that the rezoning and the ASR be approved this year so we can start construction and get those folks moving. Before we embarked on this, we met with the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance and several stakeholders to set some guiding principles. And you'll see that although it's a general rezoning case, we're also going to show you some of the ASR site plan that makes clear these principles have been carried through the concept design, including focusing on that stream that John highlighted, planning for an urban future mixed-use campus, and with the P3 development, which would be the first of its kind for state property, and enhancing the development along Blue Ridge Corridor by promoting walking and bicycling and multimodal transportation. That led to this overall concept plan where you see the urban park campus is part of our phase 1 ASR at the top of the site near Reedy Creek Road and adjacent to the Greenway. The existing blue line stream kind of focused in the center as an urban park, and then to the south of the site would be the future P3 development parcel. We talk about phase 1, we're pursuing a multi-phase development because this property and the zoning process that's authorized by the General Assembly is done in phases. So right now we're focusing on the site plan for the ASR, which is what you see in front of you for phase 1, which would include a 440,000 square foot office tower and parking deck, followed in phase 2 by a similar sized office tower for the remaining DHHS employees in the triangle, and it's an additional parking deck, and then the P3 development to the south. Right now, that phase 1 ASR is going through plan review, and we're hopeful that we'll receive favorable comments on that in the coming month or two. It's also a multiple layer process. Of course, we've withdrawn the comprehensive plan amendment, but the ASR was received a kind of pilot program to be processed concurrently. So although it's a general zoning case, we are able to share details that we believe kind of meet those intent of the frontage policies that John mentioned. So as John mentioned, it's existing OX3 and OX5. We're requesting to zone to CX12. As you can see on the map, although it's an OX zoning today, the north, the west, and the north and west area are OX, but the east and south areas are designated CX12, and that's the request that we're pursuing today. Those areas do have an urban frontage, but because of the P3 element, we're not comfortable committing to the urban frontage because of the way that the project has been designed and the office campus has been created. And what's important, I think, to understand is that even though there's an inconsistency finding by staff, a good half of the site is consistent with that future land use designation, and that really correlates with where we envision the actual concept to be delivered. The portion of the site that's designated office and residential mixed use is where the future headquarters for DHHS will be located on our submitted ASR review, and the southern portion of the site that's designated the community mixed use is where we envision the mixed use P3 campus. So understand that that's part of the ASR and not part of a zoning condition, but those are pending before the city for approval. I'll let the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance talk in more detail about how this plan is consistent with their goals and their mission, but I think it is important to note that we've taken the area-specific guidance into consideration, including revitalization of the Blue Ridge Corridor and having the development of state-owned property serve as a catalyst for future development and participation in state-owned property, which is a significant part of this area. The Corridor Alliance mission is, of course, to further that type of development and have the partnership between the city and the state result in great mixed-use, walkable campuses along the area where the land is rather underserved today. We believe this is consistent with the comprehensive plan, namely in terms of revitalizing the state property and making sure that those properties are able to receive a higher and more participant use. And as you can see in the site plan, this is actually a rendering of the Phase 1 site plan that's been submitted. We've taken those elements into account by including the greenway to the north of the site, having pedestrian facilities throughout the site, including elements like street trees and pedestrian plazas to draw folks in both from across the street and then also facilitate that future P3 campus. We did perform a TIA in connection with the ASR. There's Phase 1 improvements that are recommended. Our traffic engineer is here to help address any of those questions, but we're working through that with the city right now and providing commitments that are phased according to the phases of development that I think we envision will work well with the city's planned projects. There's also existing significant transit and bike ped opportunities here with the existing Go Raleigh bus route, as well as the greenway and planned facilities that will incorporate not only that greenway connection, but also the regular pedestrian sidewalk connections, both adjacent to and throughout the site. This just briefly shows the conceptual future build out, so you can see how the office is kind of clustered to the top where that OX designation is today, and the future P3 down to the south of the site, and just a rendering of the kind of the models. I'll leave it here and reserve the rest of the 3 minutes for the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance and the Museum of Art to address their support for the case, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Good morning, Jeff Murison. I'm the Executive Director of the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. We've had a fantastic partnership with the applicant, having significant conversation over the past 2 years as this project's developed. We're in full support of this project, believe it's in the best interest of the corridor, and it helps achieve our goals of advancing the redevelopment of this important part of our city. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Murison.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Catherine White. I'm Deputy Director of the North Carolina Museum of Art. Also want to thank the applicant for allowing us to be involved throughout this conversation and process. Like the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance, of which we are stakeholders, the North Carolina Museum of Art supports the proposed rezoning of the 34-acre parcel. We believe the larger goals of creating a campus feel, preserving the natural areas and streams, connecting areas of the corridor, and achieving walkability, all of which align to the museum's and the DNCR's strategic plan and vision, are better achieved through this proposal. We trust the state's ability to achieve in these areas, and we look forward to having a partner in service to our community and the citizens of North Carolina across the street. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public wishing to speak in support? Okay. Ms. Schwedler, would you like to reserve time?
Sure, I'll reserve time for any questions or
Okay, thank you. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak in opposition to this case? Please come forward now.
Good morning. My name is Mark Paterni. I live at 3317 Roller Mill Court, Raleigh. It's about 3 miles from this site, and as such, as in other recent actions, we're too far to be considered neighbors for early notification and involvement in some of the early descriptions or discussions. I applaud some of the state's actions and design features, and I leave a lot of the technical urban frontage issues to you guys. I don't pretend to understand that stuff. What I do understand every day is the amount of construction and rezoning requests going on in the vicinity from just north of Glenwood to within the Blue Ridge area, Blue Ridge Road inside of Glenwood, Edwards Mill Road. We recently have the Bandwidth development, the state sold property for private development. And all of this is bringing more and more traffic and congestion, not just to the intersections that the TIAs deal with, But with the main feeder roads, the amount of traffic that backs up on Edwards Mill Road, Route 40, Wade Avenue, 440, Glenwood Road, all this has a cascading cumulative impact on everyone who lives in the area. And some of the small secondary roadways are quite ignored, whether it be Lake Boone Trail, Ridge Road, or Reedy Creek Road and Trenton Road, where I live, as we get more and more pass-through traffic for people trying to avoid the heavily congested main arteries. So I understand the state's dilemma, and I would like to see the project move forward, but I would like to see more emphasis on creative thinking to move some of this parking off-site. We've got PNC Arena and the NC State Stadium parking lots, which are empty most of the time. They would be great satellite lots a little closer to Wade Avenue and Route 40 than bringing all of this parking to the site itself. That would perhaps alleviate some of the pressure on the secondary roads. The other thing that I would ask is that this not go forward without conditions, that some conditions be made to address the traffic infrastructure, that these small secondary roads be paid more attention to, the traffic calming projects be instituted to try and help the people who have lived there for years. That's really all I have to say, as I would like to see more infrastructure. And of course, our transit system, 30-minute bus service for 5,000 eventual employees is the plan, as I understand. Even for 2,000 employees is not very significant bus service. And I think our transit system, mass transit, really needs to be brought up to speed. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Any questions?
Thank you, sir. Are there any other members of the public wishing to speak in opposition to this case?
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Kathy Matillo-Roney. I live at 2404 Trinity Farms Road. I'm one of Mark's neighbors, and I just want to agree with almost everything that Mark said. The neighbors in the area think that the development is a great idea. We're all pretty excited about it, but we also live in an area that has been it's becoming a cut through. Our road, Trinity Farms, is right off of Trenton, and Trenton Reedy Creek corridor, it's a rural-like road that wasn't meant to be a cut through, and we're starting to see semis back there. I've seen 3 in the last month. That type of cut through is not going to be safe. The area is a neighborhood entrance to the state park. Also, Shank is back there, Shank Forest, and a lot of people bike and walk back there, and that little road is just not going to be able to handle the increased traffic. So although we agree with the project, and it really sounds very, very exciting, we're just hoping that this zoning is postponed until some of these TIA issues and other traffic issues can be addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Is that the last member of the public wishing to speak? No. All right, Ms. Schwadler, did you want to take your reserved time?
Thank you, and we appreciate the comments from the neighbors and understand the concern with traffic. And I'd like to address just the general zoning case and then to the traffic. The reason this is coming forward as a general zoning case and not as a conditional case is at the direction of the state and the General Assembly, because of the way the Department of Administration is running the actual project. And it's important to both of those bodies, all 3 of those bodies, that type of vehicle be used here. So we're not able to make this a conditional case and still remain on our timeline. We'd have to go back and restructure everything, and it wouldn't put us in a position to relocate all the folks from Dorothea Dix campus. But because of that, we received a special pilot program to be able to run the ASR concurrently. And so we did that at the same time intentionally as a zoning case. And we studied the traffic in connection with the Phase 1 ASR. That Phase 1 ASR has been studied through the city's Envision program. We've been working with the transportation engineers, and the commitments as a result of the Phase 1 traffic that will be generated are conditions of the ASR. They're not part of the general zoning case. This is a general case just like bandwidth was, without conditions, without any frontage. But we are having those conditions as part of the ASR. So everything you showed on the screen has been studied and will continue to be studied. And there is some coordination that has to be worked out with the city projects that are already planned for this area, but those conversations are ongoing with the city in terms of the ASR. So I just wanted to confirm that we understand the concern. It is being addressed. It's not being addressed in the general zoning case with a condition, but it is being addressed with the ASR that's running concurrently.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to pull it back and see if there are any questions or comments from commissioners. I'm going to start off. There's an emailed comment from Commissioner Bennett, who's absent and excused. The TIA notes that there is inadequate infrastructure, and this will have significant impacts on the road network. Ms. Schwedler just addressed part of this. Commissioner Bennett continues, this is counter to the Blue Ridge Corridor study, which encourages walking, biking, and transit. I would ask if staff could address the Phase 1 ASR and any of the mitigation alternatives that are proposed with the site plan.
Fontaine Burris with the Transportation Department. As it was stated earlier, there was a separate TAA done for the ASR that is being coordinated with an existing bike ped improvement project along Blue Ridge, which includes the frontage of this site. That will be adding a 10-foot multi-use path and a protected intersection of Reedy Creek and Blue Ridge. That project and the improvements for this site outlined in the TIA are being coordinated to make sure that the two don't conflict and they complement each other.
Thank you. Do we have any additional questions or comments from commissioners for either staff or the applicant? Commissioner O'Haver?
I'd like to ask the applicant to just explain a little bit more about being uncomfortable with the frontage on the P3. I mean, that's where most of the inconsistencies are on the frontage. So I'm just trying to get something to get a hold of, to get comfortable, since if we're going to make a motion that it is consistent, since it's inconsistent, I'm just looking for something a little bit more to sink my teeth into.
Sure. The issue is with the way that the building has already been designed. I think some of those frontage elements could be achieved or similarly achieved, but because the site is general use and we're looking at doing the P3 on the southern portion of the site, that has not been pursued by the state before. That would be the first time that the state is pursuing that kind of mixed use project. And there's the state is trying to protect against risks of what that could mean going forward. We do have the fortunate ability that the same person who's in charge of this project, Will Johnson, is also going to be writing the P3 proposal. And so many of the feedback that we've heard here, and most importantly, the feedback we've heard for the 2 years from the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance about those elements are going to be baked into how that proposal is presented for private development. And just to be clear, it will remain as a state-owned property with private participation. It's not intended to be sold to private. So there will be restrictions that the state is able to impose to shape this area. And of course, the state has the most vested interest in making this project successful, making this P3 great from the outset. So we're taking all of that into consideration, but there was a hesitancy in terms of adding the frontage as part of the zoning case, because the authority we got from the General Assembly and from the direction of the state was a general zoning case without conditions, and the frontage in their mind is similar to a condition. And so we're trying to incorporate all of those elements as we go forward in the case, and I think some of those are borne out in the imagery we shared with the site plan, pulling the parking back, making more of a kind of a urban plaza and walkability features adjacent to the site, but a discomfort with the formality of applying a frontage. So we hope it's the same intent, just through a different vehicle, but borne out to make both the city and neighbors and stakeholders feel comfortable. And I believe we've made the stakeholders feel comfortable with that concept, and I hope the city can be as well.
Vice Chairman?
Ms. Swegler, has the private entity been identified at this moment? And if so, can you disclose who that is?
No, sir, we haven't even begun the P3 process. For this particular state property, everything has to be authorized by the General Assembly and funded separately. So the only authority we have right now is the phase one, because we have that timing of getting folks off of Dick's campus and relocated here and consolidating operations for the phase one. The P3 would have to go through a separate process. It's actually a separate statute that the state would have to pursue, and they're not beginning that until they get the first priority, which is everybody relocated on time, and free up Dick's for its own development, as the city has an interest in that. So that will be in a future time. I don't know if I have a timeline on when that is, because this is really the priority.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Nope. Personally, I did have some concern about the lack of a frontage, as well as Commissioner O'Haver. Based on the good faith effort put forward with the phase one development, I would assume that no one would reduce the value of their asset by building something less good next to something that would be quite attractive on the corridor. So I'm less concerned about that one. I do believe we could make a motion and then have a standalone recommendation that council consider some frontage or additional guideline related to the P3 development.
I mean, I'm generally in support, but since you mentioned Commissioner Bennett, to channel my internal Miss Bennett, you know, I made a comment last week about a potential case and its impact. It's not about doing something less good next to something good. It's more about the commitment to the community, the urban fabric, and we have frontages in place for a reason. And so I'm in support of the case. I totally understand the flum. I see the design. I guess I would have a hard time. I'm in support, but someone else is gonna have to make a motion because it's clearly inconsistent. There's nothing being put forward to make it consistent other than we're gonna do it. And if we were to take that approach on other cases, it would be difficult. So I'm in support, but I won't be able to make a motion just because I'm not sure. Someone else smarter than me is going to have to show me how it's consistent in the language.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing that Commissioner O'Haver has removed himself from making a motion, are any other commissioners interested in making a motion at this time? Okay. I will offer a motion to approve case number Z 2021 as it is reasonable and in the public interest and consistent with the comprehensive plan, specifically policies related to compact development, capitalizing on transit access, corridor development, density transitions, greenhouse gas reduction, and promoting quality design policy. Is there a second?
Second.
I have offered a motion. Commissioner Miller has seconded. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Nope. Seeing none, I will ask for a show of hands. Those in support of approving case Z 2021? All opposed? The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
All right, moving on to case number Z2921, TCZ 321. This is a request to modify the zoning conditions on a parcel of approximately .98 acres, which is currently zoned office mixed-use 3 stories conditional use with Special Highway Overlay District 2. The proposed modifications would increase the maximum height from 36 feet to 50 feet, allow up to 35 dwelling units on the site, and change the uses that are prohibited. This request has not been previously discussed, so I will start asking for a staff presentation.
All right, thank you. Z-29-21 is a text change for rezoning conditions, TCC-3-21. This is just south of I-40 on Jones Franklin Road. As you can see in this map here, the jurisdiction of Cary starts just to the west of here and on the south side of I-40. The other zoning in the area is a mix of residential and mixed use. Directly adjacent is a residential mixed use district with a 3-story height. And there are special highway overlay districts here, which this rezoning request would retain for the site. So you can see the larger area. So this is near the crossroads area of Cary and south of I-40. There's Lake Johnson in the top right of the image. And then you can see the Dillard Drive schools to the bottom right, to the southeast. And Tryon Road runs just south of here. Here you can see the site a little closer. There is one structure on the site that is a converted detached house, which is now an office use, a medical office use. And then you can see the apartments on either side. The apartments to the east are 2 stories, and then to the west are 3 stories. Here you can see that a little closer. There is a bit of a drop in the topography coming off of Jones Franklin towards the site. And there's the existing structure. Here's the changes that are proposed to the conditions. The things that I'll point out here to you are that the original conditions limited the amount of residential development to a single dwelling unit. My understanding of the history of that condition is that when the apartments to the east and south were rezoned under the old Part 10 zoning code prior to the Unified Development Ordinance, they were rezoned to residential 15, and there was a density transfer from this site to that site. With the remapping and the UDO, that density calculation is now irrelevant because the adjacent apartments are now zoned residential mixed use, and so that density transfer is no longer binding on this site, aside from this zoning condition. The other things I'll point out is just some changes to the prohibited uses, so those are mostly just being updated to reflect the current code language, and then also just to screen out some of those more intense uses that would be allowed in office mixed use. And then you can see finally the height condition C, formerly a maximum of 36 feet, and that has been proposed to be changed to 50 feet. I will note that that's duplicative of the zoning code. The maximum height in office mixed use with 3-story height is 50 feet, but that is fine if they want to leave that in there. That's not necessarily a conflict. Here you can see the breakdown of the potential development on the site. So the main takeaway here being the residential component increasing to as many as 36 potential units. The office component remaining relatively similar, though it does increase due to the height increase. This area has a fairly high walk score considering the location adjacent to the highway. I believe that's related to the amount of employment uses nearby with offices and the shopping mall. There is not good transit service here. So it would require walking a bit of a distance to get to the nearest transit stop. In one case, crossing I-40 or passing through the interchange of I-40. This would add to the potential housing supply in this area. The EJ screen results for this area show a slightly less vulnerable population in terms of economic vulnerability and demographic vulnerability than Raleigh in general, so a little bit more advantaged here. The only known use of this site is the original house and then this current office use. And no known equity issues with the land use history. So the requested OX district, though it is the existing district, is inconsistent with the future land use map designation of medium density residential here. Medium density residential does not anticipate standalone commercial uses, which the OX district would allow. So if this is approved, it would lead to an amendment to the future land use map. The Parkway corridor that's mapped on I-40 would call for a vegetated area along the roadway that is provided by the Special Highway Overlay District that this proposal would retain, so that's consistent. Overall, the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan due to the compatibility with existing surrounding uses and the consistency with the urban form map, and you can see that here. The future land use map, again, is inconsistent. And then just a very minor inconsistency related to the fact that a 50-foot height on this site, or 3 stories, could potentially be a little bit of a departure from the character of the 2-story apartments behind, but not a major compatibility issue there. And here you can see the future land use map amendment. The amended designation would be office and residential mixed use. And you have until November the 8th to make a recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Anagnost. Next, I'd like to hear from the applicant. The applicant and those in favor have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Did he not bring your presentation?
That's okay.
Yeah, if you want to get going, I can.
No, it's okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Recker with Strong Rock Group. This is my first time addressing you guys. This is so very excited to be here. Staff did a very good job, I think, of explaining what our intent is with this rezoning. It's more or less revisiting conditions that were placed on the property 20 years ago when the area was obviously completely different. We're trying to allow the property to be developed under the underlying zoning that exists while adhering to any of the development standards of that underlying zoning. We have offered up prohibited uses that fall more in line with what is currently in the UDO that would not be allowed either by right or conditional or special use within the RX district. We do believe that this site, even though the future land use map does say that this is not, this is a residential area, we do believe that office, residential, or mix of those uses is appropriate right along I-40. It's a small infill site. There's the minimal traffic impact for the maximum development of this property. We would still be adhering to the SHOD overlay and any other development standards that would apply to the site. And that's actually what I have.
Thank you. Next, are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this request? Seeing none, I will open up for questions or comments from commissioners for either staff or the applicant. I will start with one question. The primary inconsistency is related to the zoning not meeting the future land use designation, but the zoning that is requested is what is currently on the ground.
That's correct.
Okay.
So at the time the zoning was applied, the new requirement in the state statutes that the future land use map be amended to be consistent was not in play, and so it was never amended. And therefore the inconsistency stood at some point in the past when this zoning was approved. The inconsistency was deemed outweighed by the benefits of the zoning, but the map was never revised. The inconsistency is obviously not being made any different or worse than the current situation. I'll defer to the city attorney as to whether or not we would actually have to amend the future land use map, given the fact that the base district is not changing and this is a text change to zoning conditions.
I don't know that that's come up before, but I don't see why you would treat it any different.
Right.
Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners?
So just to clarify that, we would not need to amend the future land use map if we recommend approval?
Well, I think that it's automatically done under the statutes. So when council ultimately gets to council and if they approve it, it would be an automatic thing. But as part of your recommendation to council or part of your comments regarding consistency, it would be a good thing to state that it would be an amendment to the future land use map.
So had that change in state statute been made prior to this date, there would not be an inconsistency now because the future land use map would have been updated. Is that an accurate statement?
That's correct.
Okay.
And although this is definitely an unusual situation, I agree with the attorney that sounds, making the amendment to the future land use map certainly seems more in keeping with the spirit of the statute.
All right, thank you. Oh, perfect, thank you. Okay, are there any additional questions or comments? Seeing none, I would like to entertain a motion. And there is a consistency statement in the backup for this one, which also addresses the future land use amendment that would be required. Commissioner Datil?
Yeah, I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated August 24, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of zoning case Z2921. This recommendation also includes an amendment to the 2030 comprehensive plan and future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Datil has offered a motion. Is there a second? Commissioner Elder? Is there any additional debate or discussion on the merits of the motion? No. Seeing none, I will call a vote. By a show of hands, those in approval of Z2921 and the motion made by Commissioner Datil and seconded by Commissioner Elder. Those opposed? No. The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to case number Z3321. This is a request to rezone approximately 1.81 acres to allow changes in conditions. The property zoning designation would remain as neighborhood mixed use 3 stories conditional use. And the request has not been previously discussed, so we will start off with a staff presentation from Don Belk.
Good morning, Chair Fox, members of the Planning Commission. This rezoning is located at the intersection of Pool Road and Sunnybrook. It involves 4 parcels, 3 on Pool and 1 on Sunnybrook. The 1.81 acres under this request, no doubt you'll note that the zoning designation does not change. I just wanted to clarify that the current NX3 conditional use zoning district that the proposed rezoning is part of contains more than the 4 parcels included in the request. Therefore, a text change for zoning conditions cannot be applied in this case. So a rezoning is required to create a new NX3 CU district with the conditions that are specific to these 4 parcels, just to clarify that. And your deadline for action is November 8th. Again, most of the surrounding zoning, you see the large expanse of R6. Most of it around the intersection is NX neighborhood mixed use and commercial mixed use, although the majority of that CX3 zoning is currently vacant with some large, except for some large, there is a small large lot community along Sunnybrook and then those large lots along Pool. Aerial view showing the different land uses. I would note that the public facilities designated site, that is land that's owned by NCDOT, and their publicly stated intentions are to develop an operations facility at that location at some point in the future. A close-up showing some of the recent rezoning cases in this particular area. some streetscape views showing the prominent location of this site at the intersection Pool Road eastbound and Sunnybrook Road southbound, and another perspective from looking to the north and west along those two avenues. The proposed conditions, some land uses would be prohibited. This is consistent with other rezoning cases that have specifically noted these prohibited uses, as well as the limitations on amusement devices and the prohibition on drive-throughs. The fourth, fifth, and sixth conditions are intended to present a hybrid frontage for this site. Note the residential density would increase nearly 3 times, as would the maximum number of units. The office and retail square footage under the existing zoning are limited by an existing condition that limits floor area ratio. So the applicant's intention was to remove that condition, and you can see that it would create more opportunities for mixed-use development at this location. Basically, under the transportation and energy, walk score, bike score, transit score, all roughly the city average, and the higher transportation cost index is higher than average, and as well as the job proximity is higher than average. The site is served by regular service by Route 19, Apollo Heights. I do need to note the correction was on the PowerPoint but not on the PDF here. I apologize. This proposal does not include subsidized units. So there should be an X beside that one, but it does add to the housing supply, permits a variety of types and smaller units, and it is within walking distance of transit. Our analysis of the demographics and land use history, you can see here that several of these indicators are nearly twice the city average. We have found that there are no known restrictive covenants that restrict development beyond UDO requirements at this location. The requested rezoning is consistent with neighborhood mixed use. One of the parcels, the Sunnybrook Road parcel, is designated as moderate density residential. And the conditions that are proposed would result in a hybrid frontage, therefore consistent with the transit emphasis corridor at Pool and Sunnybrook. The proposal is consistent with the comprehensive plan, consistent with the future land use map, and consistent with the urban form map. Note these consistent policies, including key policies, and no inconsistent policies were identified in this proposal. And again, your deadline for action is November 8th, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Belk. Next, I'd like to hear from the applicant. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Apologize for that. Sorry about that.
Good morning, Chair Fox and Planning Commissioners. We're having a little technical difficulty. Our presentation wasn't uploaded, but I'll just kind of talk you through one minor change from what Mr. Belk had presented to you on the conditions, but he did a great summary of our overall request. I'm not going to go through all that again. I'll just be happy to answer any specific questions you have. I think I forgot to introduce who I was. I'm Jennifer Ashton from Longleaf Law Partners, and I'm here today on behalf of the applicant. One thing I did want to point out on the conditions, as Mr. Belk mentioned, we have added 3 conditions at the end to address a hybrid frontage for the site. In our conversations with Mr. Belk, he indicated that the city was very interested in maintaining a high level of walkability along Pool Road because it is a high level of bus service along that roadway. So we did take a look at the parking limited frontage standards and did try to incorporate those into the site as much as possible. We are a very oddly shaped site. We're more of a triangle. So you'll notice in conditions 4 through 5, the limitation of parking between the buildings and the street, that limitation is on Pool. It is not applying to Sunnybrook, again, because we're tightly squeezed on the site. But the 2 parking limited conditions related to front-facing buildings to the street and also pedestrian connections to the sidewalks, those are both going to be along Pool Road and Sunnybrook Road. Once we turned in our conditions to Mr. Belk, Casey Evans from the planning department took a look at them and asked for a few tweaks on language just for clarity. They weren't substantive changes. Unfortunately, I'm not able to show those to you today, but they were not substantive. They just were little minor language tweaks, again, for clarification purposes. And with that being said, as Mr. Belk summarized, we are consistent with the urban form map, the future land use map, and the comp plan overall, and he hasn't identified any inconsistent policies. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we open up to questions, I just want to verify, are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this request? Yep, okay. And to clarify, there are revised conditions, but those do not appear in the backup materials. Is that an accurate statement?
They have been submitted to the city. They were in our presentation for today. So I'm assuming that means that they're part of the official submittal. Is that, sorry, I'm not sure.
When were they submitted?
Last week.
Yes, the conditions were submitted in the prescribed time frame.
Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing that we don't have access to the conditions at this moment, Commissioner Dautel, if you have a question, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I do have a hard copy with, if we can pass this around, if that would be helpful. Again, they're just minor word changes.
Okay.
Thank you.
While we're passing that around, can we move forward with questions from commissioners? Commissioner Dautel, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a quick question about the condition regarding the number of coin-activated amusement devices. Can you talk a little bit about how that number was arrived at or why that's in there?
Yes, so that was a condition from 1989. Apparently that was a concern back then. We wanted to update the 1989 conditions as much as possible, but we didn't want to eliminate use restrictions that clearly were there for a reason back in the day. Okay. So how they arrived at that number, I'm not quite sure, but it was one that to me kind of rang that it was important to the community at the time, so we didn't want to touch it.
It's just to provide clarity, the conditions that the applicant is referencing are the same conditions that are in your backup.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So just for my own clarity, again, I'm never shy to expose myself. Not expose myself, sorry, expose my ignorance. How is it that I've read the conditions a number of times. We're not changing the zoning. What is the mechanism that's allowing us to increase the density? I'm sorry, I should know that, but.
So
Well, existing zoning is NX3CU, proposed zoning is NX3CU, and we're going from a residential density on the existing zoning from 9 units to 31 units per acre. And the office square footage is going up, and the retail square footage is going up. And we've got conditions that are addressing different items than that. And so,
Chair Fox, I'll be happy to answer that if you would like me
Please
to.
go ahead.
So this is a little bit unusual case procedurally. Originally in 1989, there were 5 parcels that were subject to the zoning conditions at the time. With this current request, we're seeking only to change those conditions on 4 parcels. Because we weren't adding that 5th parcel, the planning staff said, you can't just go through this as a normal text amendment to zoning conditions because you're not adding in that 5th parcel. You can't change their conditions without them being part of the application. So we're coming in as an actual rezoning request because that is the only procedural mechanism to do this, to change the conditions on only 4 of the parcels. With respect to how are we increasing the density from what it was to what it is going to be, under the old conditions in 1989, there was a 0.26 FAR requirement. With this new rezoning request, we are eliminating that. So that is how we're getting the increase in residential density and square footage for commercial.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Okay. Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion.
I don't know if I've made a motion today, so I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated August 24th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of case Z3321. The project's consistent with the comprehensive plan. It's consistent with the future land use map. And specifically policies, well, all of them, and they all got orange dots on them too, which is pretty cool. Policy LU 2.2, compact development. Policy LU 2.6, zoning infrastructure impacts. Policy LU 5.1, reinforcing the urban pattern. Policy LU 7.3, single-family lots on major streets. Policy LU 7.6, pedestrian-friendly development.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Haver has made a motion. Do we have a second? Commissioner Elder? Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by a show of hand, how many are in support of approving case Z3321? All opposed? The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Moving on to item F.4, which is case number Z4221. This is a request to rezone approximately 3.72 acres from residential 4 to residential 6 conditional use. This request has not been previously discussed, so I'd like to start off with a staff presentation from Hannah Recco.
All right, good morning. This is case Z4221, request to rezone 3 properties, about 3 3/4 acres from R4 to R6, conditional use. 3 properties south of the intersection with Lynn Road. As you can see, the surrounding area is predominantly residential and has R4 zoning according with that. General location, this is in North Raleigh. The closest big intersection is with Creedmoor Road and Lynn Road. You can see there's some commercial uses around, clustered around that intersection with some higher density residential. And then the surrounding area is predominantly low density residential, like the zoning. And then the site is adjacent to Lynn Elementary School. A close up, you can see the site is partially forested. There's one detached house located on the middle parcel, and the property backs up to directly to Lynn Elementary. Some views from Ben Burr Road. This is its only frontage. You can See again the forest nature of the site. This is a conditional use request. There are two conditions. One prohibits townhouse and apartment building types, and the second limits the total number of dwelling units to 16. And so the change in entitlement is pretty minimal. Main difference is the dimensional standards that would apply, the setbacks, smaller setbacks, and a smaller lot size. Transportation and energy analysis. This area has a similar walk score and transit score to the city overall, lower bike score than average, higher transportation cost index, but a higher proximity to jobs than average. No bus service within walking distance. The nearest service is on Creedmoor Road. And then there would be a minimal addition to the housing supply. No subsidized units would permit both attached and detached housing types and a smaller lots than the citywide average. And again, not in walking distance of transit. The area population has a smaller, lower index of sort of vulnerable population. So in general, it's older than the city as a whole, higher education, higher income, and less racially diverse. Medium rents have increased similar to the citywide average and found no historical record of urban renewal or restrictive covenants in the area. Future land use map in this area is low density residential. The request of R6 is consistent with that designation. And then there's no urban form guidance for the site. So overall, the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, including the future land use map designation, a handful of policies, mainly speaking to the very similar type of development that would be permitted to the surrounding area as an infill site. And then no inconsistent policies were identified. So that is the end of the staff presentation. Your deadline for action is in October, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Recco. Next, I'd like to hear from the applicant. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Chair Fox and Planning Commissioners. I'm Molly Stewart, Morningstar Law Group, 421 Fayetteville Street. I'm here today with Adam Nix of Heritage Construction, the applicant on this request. A few preliminary words. Through our zoning conditions, we've achieved a situation where there will be very little difference or daylight between the existing zoning and the proposed zoning with respect to overall density and the types of uses you would expect to see there. In prohibiting apartments and townhomes, and limiting the number of units, we've really kind of taken off the table the major differences between the zoning districts. And as you saw in the staff presentation, the primary goal is to allow some flexibility in the lot dimensions to better fit the shape of the existing site today. Also, I'd like to note that although no second neighborhood meeting was required for this matter, there was kind of an informal meeting held on the site in addition to our required neighborhood meeting. There was, like I said, an on-site kind of tour and conversation. Approximately 15 neighbors attended that in addition to our neighborhood meeting. And that was held on June 16th. I have lost where to change this. There we go. Okay, so this shows you the differences in those lot dimensions that we're talking about. And again, that is just to fit within the shape of the site that we have. I will not belabor this point, as staff has noted our consistency with the comprehensive plan overall. Also, I'd just like to sort of put this in context as a situation where we're providing housing within that existing city footprint, filling in gaps essentially. This is a situation where this site of 3.72 acres currently has one house on it, which really represents sort of a hole in the existing fabric of this area, which has similar densities to those proposed, as well as some surrounding amenities and uses. And with that, I am available for questions, as is Mr. Nix. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to check first, are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this request? No. Seeing none, let us start with questions and comments from commissioners. I have emailed comment and question from Commissioner Bennett asking if there are any specific plans for connectivity to Lynn Road Elementary School and Williams Park. There are sidewalks in that area. She just wanted to make sure they will connect the parcel to encourage safe walking and biking to and from those locations.
Certainly, and although we would certainly be required to put the sidewalk there on Ben Burr, which would connect over along the streetway, I will turn it over to Adam Nix to address if we've gotten that far on the site plan. At this point, I don't believe we're that far along to have really laid out those kinds of details.
Hey, good morning. We have not gotten that far with our site plan development, but there is a sidewalk that runs down Ben Burr that connects to the sidewalk on Lynn Road, if I'm not mistaken. That would take you directly to Lynn Road School. There's a pretty significant grade change between our site and Lynn Road Elementary School. It sits kind of way down in a hole, so maybe a connective sidewalk or walking trail there would maybe not be the best case.
Thank you.
Hope that answers your question.
Thank you, it does. Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Dautel?
I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated August 24, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and recommend approval of zoning case Z4221.
Do we have a second? Commissioner Elder? We have a motion on the table from Commissioner Dautel and a second from Commissioner Elder. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in support of approving Z4221, any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. All right, that concludes all the discussion items on our agenda today. Next is approval of the minutes. I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes for the August 10 meeting. Commissioner Miller?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second? Commissioner Elder? By show of hands, those in support? Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Next, on to report of the chairperson. Our next full Planning Commission meeting, it will occur virtually, that is correct, on September 14th. And we have one remaining in-person meeting this week, that is Committee of the Whole. Just, I know as we shift ourselves to the changing nature of the meetings, it is challenging to recall whether we are in person or virtual. So again, stating, Cal meeting this Thursday is in person, and the next Planning Commission meeting on September 14th is virtual. Okay, are there any reports of the members? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to report of the Deputy Planning Director, Mr. Bowers.
So you have the written report in your packet. I will highlight a few things. 2 time extensions you requested, one for TC 321 Bicycle Street cross sections, which was on consent, and Z6020 were granted. So you have till September 22nd to act on both of those items. The public hearings were held yesterday that were moved from last Tuesday because of the need to switch at the last minute from a in-person to a remote meeting. There were 5 items, all of which you had recommended approval except for one, which was Z1621 Conquest Drive. That was withdrawn by the applicant. PC had recommended denial unanimously. The other items, which included Z5520 on Lake Wheeler, Z1521 and TCZ 121 on North Blunt and Delway, Z2221 on Atlantic Avenue, and Z121 in Edwards Mill were all approved at the public hearing. And there are 2 text changes that will be coming your way in the future that were the result of petitions. One is amendment to the vehicle fuel sales use standards, and the other one is accommodation for breweries in the CX district.
Excellent, thank you. Do we have anything else for the good of the order? No?
I have a quick question.
right ahead.
For the consent agenda process, I know that we approved it. I'm trying to, and typically there's something in the agenda materials that says exactly what we are consenting to, what we are approving. And I wasn't clear So like it'll say we're recommending a time extension or something like that. I didn't, I see the recommended action for the second one, but for this text change, what, is this just to hold it at the table until?
It is. So you might remember the last discussion you had about that text change. The direction of the commission was to bring it back at this meeting. And staff is still in the process of writing the revised language.
Gotcha.
So it would not have been ready for today's meeting. So it was just holding it at the table to have a future discussion.
Gotcha. And then what is our new deadline for action? Is that in here? With the extension that's been granted?
For the text change, September 22nd.
So it'll need to come out in its final form on the 14th?
So
Or
that's
close?
correct. Our
Okay.
intention is to place it on your next planning commission agenda.
Okay. And staff is working with DSAC. I know that Commissioner Elder may have some comments as well for that part of the process, so just wanted to, but there's not going to be procedurally, we're not going to be discussing it at the table as much or changing it at the table, so is that right?
Staff's intention is to deliver the ordinance to you in a state that is approvable for you. That's correct.
Gotcha. So if you want input on that process, or if anyone wants input on that process, then reach out directly to staff. Who on staff in particular? Jason or Keegan?
Either or,
Okay.
Keegan McDonald or Jason Myers.
All right. Thank you.
All right, any additional questions, comments, musings? Nothing? Commissioner O'Haver? Okay, that concludes this meeting of the Planning Commission.